A very warm welcome. My name is Steve Dawson. You join us for the ASEAN Plus 3 Regional Economic Outlook presentation. Over the course of the next 60 minutes or so, we'll try and assess the state of play for the countries in our region and also try and establish how well prepared they are to face the next 12 months. Well, we know that many of you are logging on around the region and indeed around the world on Twitter and on LinkedIn. It's wonderful to have you with us. This is the fourth such presentation that we have made. The very first one we did was back in 2017, and at that time we were commemorating the 20th anniversary of the Asian financial crisis. Seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? But I wonder if we are coming full circle. That could well be one of the things we discussed during the course of the day. Our presentation will be split into two parts. The first of them will discuss the regional outlook, and we'll also make some policy recommendations during that time. The second part of our presentation will deal with long-term growth. Now, there are a couple of ways that you can get yourselves involved. The first one is to send us questions, and we'll do our best to get round to answering as many of those as we can. You can join us at slido.com. The event code is hashtag in capital letters AREO 2020. And as you can see, there's a QR code to help you get involved there as well. Now, the person answering those questions is the Chief Economist at AMRO-ASEAN Plus 3, Dr. Kor Ho-ee. Dr. Kor, this is effectively the first day of lockdown here in beautiful Singapore. Any difficulties getting to the studio this morning?
No, it's very easy because there are hardly any traffic.
Yeah, very clear roads this morning, so that was good news. We're all here on time. Before we get to the first part of Dr. Kor's presentation, let's hear a word from the AMRO director, Mr. Toshinori Doi.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today. About a month ago, the coronavirus started to spread around the globe and is now a global pandemic. While the external environment has made the drafting process challenging, our team at AMRO are determined to press on and publish our flagship annual report, the ASEAN Plus 3 Regional Economic Outlook, or AREO 2020. We believe this report will serve as a timely and useful document for member authorities, as well as businesses and members of the public alike. Although the AREO 2020 conference had to be cancelled, we are instead here today bringing you our findings live online. We hope you enjoy the presentation by our Chief Economist, Dr. Kor Ho-ee, and find the discussion insightful. Thank you.
Thanks to Director Toshinori Doi. I mentioned that there are a couple of ways for you to get involved. One of those is questions, which Dr. Kor will answer for you. The other is that we have a survey for you, and we'll give you the question that you can take a look at and think about the various answers that we're supplying. The question that we're putting to you is, how do you view the economic outlook for the ASEAN Plus 3 region over the forthcoming period? So as you can see, four options: no recession whatsoever, wouldn't that be nice? Recession and recovery this year, that's 2020. Recession in 2020 and then into 2021. And the fourth option there is a worse recession even than the Asian financial crisis. So we'll get to the results and what you've given us in terms of your answers to that survey question shortly. But first of all, let's get to the first part of our presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Kor.
Thank you, Steve. As you said, this is our fourth edition of the report, and it's been the most challenging one to prepare. As you all know, we need to have a cutoff date for updating our data, and initially we set it for January. But then things happened so fast that we had to keep changing our forecast, otherwise we look not very credible. So we finally decided to have a cutoff date on March 16, and that's the forecast you're going to see in our report. But we're going to be updating the forecast up to today, so you see the difference the 2 weeks made in terms of our forecast. Okay, I'd like to start with this slide, the statement by Dr. Fauci. I'm sure most of you know Dr. Fauci. He is the health expert advising the White House on how to deal with the pandemic. And you know that they're under constant pressure to lift the lockdown. So he said, you don't meet the timeline, the virus does. And indeed, the virus made the timeline also for our flagship report. So I'm going to start with this, what we call the global risk map of the region. This global risk map was prepared back in December, and as you can see at that time, our big worry was the escalation in global trade tension. And the pandemic was nowhere in our radar screen at all. So the other concern that we had was the sharp slowdown in China's growth. Let me put on my spotlight. So this is the one you can see, and and then we were also concerned about the deceleration in G3 growth. So that was where we were in December. So look at the risk map now in January, and you can see that the global pandemic is up there as our top risk, and the slowdown in China we still think it's already slowed down quite a bit, but it's a medium likelihood event. And the re-escalation of the global trade tension, which was a big concern for us, is now a low likelihood event. So the risk map has completely changed in the last 3 weeks, last 3 months. So let me move on to the region, the outlook for the region. This is high, the PMI indicators for manufacturing. And as you can see, it's a heat map. So it shows how the manufacturing sector is doing depending on the color. The green color means they're doing well, and red means they are not doing well. So you can see that in 2018, it was pretty much green. And as we move to 2019, it turns yellow and orange, right? And we were hoping that once it gets to 2020, with the conclusion of the phase 1 trade deal between the US and China, that it will begin to turn yellow and green again. But as you can see from this map here, they're all red now, right? And this is all due to the pandemic. Now, if you move to the one on the right-hand side, this is on exports. As you know, the region is very open and dependent on exports. So again, you can see that in 2018, the color was mostly yellow, right? And you move to 2019, when they ratchet up the tariff, it started to turn red and orange. And again, we were hoping that in 2020 this was going to move back to yellow and green again, but unfortunately we don't have a lot of data here. But I can assure you that it's not going to turn very yellow or green. And this is a closer look at the semiconductor cycle. As you know, the region is a major exporter of electronics, and what I want to point out is that the electronic cycle was turning around, right? And you can see from here that it's actually turned positive. So we were actually quite hopeful that the electronic cycle was going to lead the recovery going forward. And you look at exports of the region, they were very negative in 2019. And again, we were hoping that this would turn up. This is high frequency data on cargoes. The Baltic Dry Index is a very famous index used by many analysts. And it was negative in 2019 and turning around. And again, we were hopeful that this was going to become positive, but I think it's less likely now. Another sector which was clobbered very badly by the pandemic is the tourism. You can see that this is contribution of tourism to GDP growth, and it's very significant for many economies, about 10%, in some cases as high as 30%. And for Philippines, it's about 25%. So it's a major sector in many countries in the region. And unfortunately, tourism took a big hit because of the pandemics. You can see the sharp fall in international travel. This is for China. They were the first to get hit. And then, this line here is for Japan, Korea actually. And Singapore, you can see the very sharp drop off. Singapore is pretty much grounded most of its flights now. So tourism is going to get a bit hit, and it's a big sector. It affects the F&B, hotels, and there's a lot of linkages with the rest of the economy. Let's move on to the financial markets. Not unexpectedly, financial markets took a big hit. They've mostly crashed around early March when the Fed started to tighten ease policy rate, and also to pump in a lot of liquidity into the market. So not surprisingly, the markets all came down very sharply. This is the average for the region. More recently, there's been some rebound because of the very big fiscal package that is put together by the Fed and also other countries around the region. This is the currency market. You can see that they mostly depreciated. And then the bond market, the yields have all spiked up quite a bit. These are capital flows. You can see that there's been massive capital outflows from the equity markets. This is just for the beginning, the early part of the year. And on this side is the bond market. There are also outflows in the bond market, except for Korea, which is still attracting significant flows into its bond market. And in the oil market, you can see the oil prices crashing from around $50, $55 to close to $20, and it sort of pick up a little bit recently because of the expectation that Saudi Arabia and Russia might be talking. And on the right-hand side, it shows that most of the countries in the region are really oil-dependent importing countries, so they will benefit some from these lower oil prices. Let's move on to the outlook, and this is the most interesting part. I'm sure you're all looking to see what our forecast is going to be for the region. So on the left-hand side is our projection back in January, and you can see that at that time, this was after the Phase 1 trade deal was concluded, and we were actually quite hopeful that the region will start to recover. So we have projected 4.9% growth for the region as a whole, with China 6.1% and ASEAN countries 4.9%, pick up from 4.6% previous year. Then, as we were doing the AREO, we had to shave down our forecast, and we shaved it down by 0.7, which was quite significant. With China going down to 5.3, and the ASEAN region 4.4. But look at our forecast today; it's down to 2%. So it's been a big drop in terms of our growth forecast for the region, with China going down to 3.5, and some analysts are projecting even lower growth than that. And for the region as a whole, 1.1 instead of 4.4%, and with some countries going into recession, especially Hong Kong and Singapore. These are the most open economy, and they're going to be hit quite badly. And on the right-hand side is how we expect the profile of growth. A very bad hit to growth in the first quarter, and this is for the ASEAN +3 countries, mostly because of China going down, and then a rebound in the subsequent quarters to 1.7. So for the whole year as a whole, 2%. For the ASEAN countries, we expect negative growth next quarter, in the second quarter, and that's because of the spike in infection and the lockdown policy that has been taken. But we do expect some recovery next quarter and the quarter after. So this is the range of forecasts in the private sector. I want to show you this because the gray part here, right, is the range of forecasts in the private sector, and this is where we are, the pink area. And you can see the range is very wide, from -3.4 to 4.4%. And there's a great uncertainty out there about how the region will do. And it's what I call the range of ignorance in a sense. And then, of course, the recovery next year, again, you can see the wide range of forecasts here. On the right-hand side, we did some simulation because our baseline scenario is based on a relatively mild recession. And this is the impact on the region from relatively negative growth in the US and in Europe, about -1.1% for US and -2+ for Europe. And the green bar basically shows that what if the recession is deeper. And you can see that in that case, the hit on the region is going to be much greater. So, the growth will have to come down even more. So let me move on to policies. But before that, let me look at the buffers. This is an interesting chart because it shows the amount of reserve that countries have built up over the years. And they are quite adequate in terms of the usual metrics, in terms of months of imports and ability to service short-term debt. You can see that on average, they are about 7-8 months of imports, and they are about 3 times adequacy ratio. And this is the IMF adequacy ratio. The gray bar is between 100 to 150%. And most of the emerging markets in the region are comfortably within the bar. So they are quite adequately have adequate reserve. And they have also built up policy buffers over the years, learning from the lesson of the AFC. So this is my final chart. This is where countries stand in terms of the COVID cycle, I call it. Infection, China is ahead of everyone. They are now, the curve is flattened off. And Korea is behind. They are a few weeks apart. But the countries in ASEAN countries have just spiked up, and it's going to take a few more weeks before they're going to level off. So I think the policies have to stay on for a while. And these are policies that are taken by the governments in the region to support the workers, the household, and the businesses through this very difficult period. And in the case of the financial sector, I think there's regulatory forbearance that's been exercised. So I'll stop here and happy to take any question you have.
Yeah, Dr. Kaur, we do have a number of questions that have come in. Let me get the first one for you here. Looking at the ASEAN +3 group of countries, how should they prioritize in terms of integration and cooperation in dealing with the threat of COVID-19?
Well, the COVID pandemic has made it more difficult to meet, for sure. Normally, we will be meeting already, and because of the pandemic, we've been unable to meet. But actually, we had a teleconference meeting, so it's changed the way we meet, but it hasn't really prevent us from meeting. So the ASEAN countries have been working very hard actually over the last several years to build up the regional financial safety net. I'm sure you heard of it. This is a financial safety net in case countries run into a liquidity shock and needs a further reserve. I mean, reserves are pretty adequate across the region, but if you get hit by a very large shock, they may need additional reserve. And that's what the region has been working on very hard. And we have also strengthened our surveillance capacity. So in the last 3 years, we have produced the flagship report. We've done annual consultation with the countries. We publish our report. So all that is very important in getting the countries to pursue sound macroeconomic policy.
We've seen a number of countries in the region make some fiscal and monetary policy measures in order to assist businesses and individuals. What can central banks and governments do to enhance this further? And is there the scope for them to make further changes?
Well, we all know the nature of the crisis is a health crisis, right? There's a standstill and businesses cannot operate. And so many of them will face cash flow problem. Workers are laid off, or many of them, their income has been cut. So I think the priority for most policymakers in the region is really to support these businesses and the household to keep them alive, basically. Yeah. Monetary policy, in terms of easing monetary policy, is not very effective now because they're pushing on the string. Demand is very weak, and even if you ease monetary policy very sharply, it's not going to help very much. On the other hand, I think most central bank regulators recognize the need to have forbearance. So there's moratorium on debt payment, rescheduling of debt, and again, this is to support the economy while it goes through this very tough lockdown period.
Touching on one of the things you said there, let me just read this question out from one of our viewers. As the epidemic is likely to widen income inequality, what can governments do about the situation so that the poor don't become even poorer and give rise to future populism?
Well, this is, I think, a concern of many countries, and I think the World Bank just published a report that there's going to be an increase in the poverty rate in the region. And it's very unfortunate, but I think governments are all struggling to try to support the poor. And there's been a cash transfer program, and also they try to provide subsidies to the corporation to keep the workers, right? But certainly, I think the region is quite fortunate because they've built up the buffer, expecting that there will be another crisis in the future and there might be a need for policy buffers and space, right? But the situation varies from country to country, and I think this is a time when, after the crisis is over, how countries can come together to help support each other.
Let's see if we can end this segment on a positive note. Got a question here that says, are there any bright spots at all in the economy amid the current carnage wrought by the pandemic?
I think so. I think this pandemic has shown us that we are all in this together. And we need to support each other. And the bright spot here, there are a few of them. One is that China has actually pretty much contained the crisis, and it shows that the crisis can be contained. But you have to be pretty strict in the policy and the measures, and not back off before it's finally all out. So it shows that if you pursue the same type of policy, that in several weeks from now, right, you will be able to contain the crisis, right? And because China is coming out of it early, it will be able to help support demand in the region. Maybe not as strongly as we would like to see, because now China is worried about imported infection from abroad, right? So it's going to be a lot more cautious in opening up in terms of ability to ramp up production and demand. But certainly it's a bright spot in the sense that you'll be able to support the other countries in the region and even in the world, right? So that's one thing. And the other bright spot I would see is that the region, as I mentioned earlier, had built up a lot of policy buffers and reserve in the past, and is able to support itself through this difficult period.
So some bright spots, that's good. We'll get your view on how well the economies in the region are able to contain this crisis shortly. But first of all, let's just have a quick corporate video.
We are the ASEAN +3 Macroeconomic Research Office, or AMRO, and securing the region's macroeconomic and financial stability is our mandate. In 1997, the region was devastated by the Asian financial crisis. Back then, the future seemed bleak, but the crisis heralded a new vision. In 2010, the Chiang Mai Initiative Multilateralization, or CMIM, came into effect. A multilateral currency swap arrangement, the CMIM aims to address short-term US dollar liquidity or balance of payments difficulties that may arise in the region. AMRO was established the following year as the macroeconomic surveillance arm of the CMIM, headquartered in Singapore. In February 2016, AMRO was transformed into an international organization, marking a new chapter in our development. Our vision is to contribute as an independent, credible, professional organization, acting as a trusted policy advisor to the ASEAN +3 members. We achieve our mission through 3 core functions: conducting macroeconomic surveillance for member economies, supporting implementation of the CMIM, and providing technical assistance to members.
At the beginning of our broadcast, we asked you for your opinion on how the region might fall into recession and get out of it. This is the question that we posed to you. We said, how do you view the economic outlook of the ASEAN +3 region over the forthcoming period? And already the results are quite stark, aren't they? None of you think that we will escape recession. Recession and recovery during the course of this year, well, just under a quarter of you, 22%. Recession in 2020 and then into 2021, almost half of you, 44%. But over a third of you believe that we will have a worse recession than the Asian financial crisis. Well, on that rather bleak outlook, I'll leave it to Dr. Kaur to raise our spirits once again with the second part of our presentation. And here we're looking at growth in the longer term. Dr. Kaur.
Thank you, Steve. Indeed, the outlook is not very bright, and we hope to prove the 34% wrong, that we will not have a recession next year. Okay, so let me start with this. As you know, our flagship report is in 2 parts. The second part is focusing on sustaining growth, and we've been looking at that over the last few years. So let me start with this chart here. we've been very concerned about when we start working on this study about the risk of protectionism and how it's going to affect growth going forward, right? And there are several other global trends, including, for instance, the fourth industrial revolution, the digital technology, and then on the other side, we know that Asia has become the factory of the world, right? The regional supply chain, which is very efficient, and it is affected, and this pandemic shows how critical it is to overall global global economy. And finally, we also looking at the fact that Asia has risen over the years, become much richer, much more affluent, and in fact, we call it Shopper Asia. Asia has become the main consumer marketplace. It is the biggest market for many products. It's a pretty mixed environment, as I said. So on the one hand, you have, let me put this up here, disruptive technology, the fourth industrial revolution, and then you have a trade tension, protectionist policy in some countries. You have the possibility of the new technology, the new economy, what we call the new economy, which is basically factory Asia, producing for Shopper Asia. And then you have the emergence of China, which is very important because China has overnight becomes a huge market for everyone. Okay, it's not moving. Sorry. Okay, here. All right, okay. So let's look at how we got to where we are today. This basically sums up, the industrialization of the region. You can see it's a flying geese model, and I think it captures very well how the region has industrialized over the last 50, 60 years, actually. And it started in the 50s and 60s with Japan, and then followed by the newly industrialized economy, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, and then as they move up the ladder, then you have another wave coming, the ASEAN Tiger 4, 4 tigers rather, which is Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, and Indonesia. And then China came in around the 80s, 90s, and it sort of moved along the curve. And then the last to industrialize are the developing CLMV countries. You can see them up here. But the process has been very successful in a sense. You can see that from this chart here. As the countries industrialize, they move from being an agrarian economy to become an industrialized economy, and then to a service economy, right? So you can see that the structure of the economy shifted over the years as they move up the value chain and industrial and move up the technology ladder. So, oops. Sorry, this thing is not working very well. Okay, here. Okay, we are also concerned about the impact of technology on manufacturing. And one of the things, our finding is that, there's been a lot of concern about how technology may be destroying jobs because of automation and all that. And what we found is that technology is an enabler for services sector. And because of that, it's fragmenting the manufacturing into parts. And some of the components, which are very service-oriented, have become industries on its own. So an example of this is in Thailand, the automobile industry. And you can see that this is the supply chain. And within each major supply chain, there's a lot of services that's been produced. And many of these services have become industries in its own. And Thailand is now producing not just cars, but actually providing services to countries around the region. And this is the hub. This basically network shows how Thailand is linked to the other countries in the region. Okay, and another example is China. China is always seen as a producer of goods, right? But if you look at this network that we've done, China used to be a small service producer, but it's become a major services hub, almost as big as the US. So not only is China producing goods in the traditional sense, but it's also producing a lot of services. There's a lot of concern about deindustrialization, deglobalization, and so this chart here, for instance, shows how global trade has plateaued over the last 10 years. And if you look at some of the indicators, for instance, increase in international migrant flows is declined, world trade has gone down, capital flows has gone down. The only part that has gone up is, trade intervention, basically dumping and all that, and that has gone up. So it is really worrisome for us here in the region because we are so open and and depend on trade for living. This chart shows basically the contribution to growth by different components of demand, and the gray part is export contribution, and you can see how this contribution has declined over time. And this is during the global financial crisis when external demand basically collapsed in the West, in Europe and in US. And the region was forced to rebalance growth, as they call it, right? And so what has happened is that the regions, have more stimulative policy to support domestic demand. And this chart on the right-hand side here is even shows you that the contribution of export or external demand to growth has shrunk from 27.4 to 19.4%. This is about this is a big drop in terms of contribution, 8 percentage point, right? So the region is now much more dependent on domestic consumption, investment for growth. And also, this chart here shows that more and more of the manufacturing products that is consumed within the region, and this is the red bar that is going up the curve over time. And in terms of the exports, more and more of it is being consumed within the intra-regional part. This is the red part, and this is for the US and Europe, and you can see how the export to these two regions have declined from 37% to 27%. So the region has become much more self-sufficient, and they're producing more to meet its own demand and also the intra-regional demand. And that has happened because the region has become richer, right? This is per capita income of the region, and you can see the rapid increase in per capita income here. This is for the what we call the high-income advanced economy, consisting of countries like Hong Kong, Singapore, Korea and Japan. And the middle income countries are in the middle part here, and even the middle income countries, you can see the big rise in the per capita income. This is for China, and China has been mentioned earlier, quite dramatic, the big sharp rise in income. And then on the right hand side, the CLMV countries and even the CLMV countries have raised their income very significantly. Okay, sorry, again. Okay, this chart shows how China has become the market of the world for consumer product. This is for luxury product, and its share of luxury market has gone up to 40%. And I think this is a projection by McKinsey, and it's likely to continue rising. So this is just to show you that because of the rising middle class in China and across the region, there is now a very large demand coming from within the region to support growth. This chart shows basically how the traditional growth paradigm has shifted because of this. The fact that now you have Factory Asia, which is producing for Shopper Asia. So no longer is the traditional model where the region is producing products for export to the West. Now they are producing products for consumption within the region. And the other factor is that with the new technology, digital technology, it has also changed the nature of the product that's been produced. It's becoming much more services type of product rather than goods. And a good example is tourism, where you see that the share of tourism within the region has increased. It used to be that most of the tourists in the past are from the West, but no longer. You see the share of has increased from 50% to about 64%. So it's about 2/3 of total tourist arrival in the region is from within. The new technology has also, as I said, given rise to new products, and we have a very young population which are sort of tech savvy, and so e-commerce has really taken off in the region. In China, it accounts for 40% of the global e-commerce, and also Indonesia and many parts of this. And I think the pandemic, ironically, has given a boost to e-commerce. So e-commerce in turn has given a boost to the logistic industry, and I think you're going to see a ramp up in the logistic industry across the region. But there's also concern about how the new technology is affecting the labor market and whether it's destroying jobs. It's a study by Oxford Economic, and it basically shows that the number of jobs destroyed is roughly about the same as the number of jobs created. Of course, the jobs created may be of a different nature. Much of the loss is in the agricultural sector and mining, and most of the new jobs are in the services sector, like wholesale and retail. So it's a mixed impact on the economy and on the labor market. So let me sum up here. I think the study we have and the findings are still relevant going forward. We are still cautiously optimistic. Certainly the pandemic has had a major impact on the region, but the fundamentals in the region are still there, and I think it will be strong enough to support the growth in the region going forward. Growth may not be as strong, but certainly, I think we are much more self-sufficient, and because of and we are also fairly tech savvy, and we embrace technology. So I'm relatively optimistic that the region will come out of this pandemic relatively fine.
It's very difficult, isn't it, to make any kind of predictive statements with the region being in such a state of upheaval. Unsurprisingly, there's a number of questions that want to pick up on some of the things you mentioned there. The first one is asking how you would assess the region's readiness to get on top of technological advancement and thrive in the new economy.
Yes, I think this is an issue that countries in the region are taking very seriously, and you can see that many of the countries in the region have come up with plans, to take leverage on what they call the digital transformation revolution, right? So they have to do two things. One is to support the existing industry, especially those with manufacturing, to help them to upgrade and move up the ladder, but also to create an environment where you can have more enterprise, more entrepreneurship, to take advantage of the new technology, create new products and new services. And I see that happening across the region, so I'm quite optimistic that the region is doing well. Yeah.
One of our viewers has already taken a look at your thematic chapter this year and notes that it touches on the gig economy and recommends that more be done to protect those working in the gig economy. And our viewer is asking, what are your key observations and thoughts on that matter?
Yeah, the gig economy is going to be an important part of the new economy. It's a growing part. One example is, for instance, Grab, Uber, Gojek in this case, the e-commerce, the delivery service. That's part of the gig economy, but also more freelancing, by consultants. And so these are typically, instead of the traditional employment where you have security, you have all the benefits, many of these workers are self-employed, and they don't enjoy the same kind of security and benefits that the traditional company offers. So because of that, I think it's very important for government to put in place policy that can protect these workers. And I think that's happening here in Singapore, for instance, in the latest package that's announced by the government. They at least see the gig workers has been affected by the pandemic, and they need to support them.
What about the next phase of growth and development, Dr. Kaur? We're asked if we're going to see incremental change from where we are today, or will there be a round of marked structural shifts?
Well, the structural shift will be forced upon most countries because of the technological revolution, the fourth industrial revolution. There's going to be more and more automation, more use of artificial intelligence. And I think the pandemic has actually accelerated the process, and made countries recognize the need to move into the digital space, much more aggressively than before, right? So yes, I think there'll be a significant shift in the way we work, how we work, and that's going to affect, be quite transformational.
People are going to have a variety of views on some of the areas we picked up on. This final question, let me put this to you. Overall, this thematic chapter offers a much more upbeat view of the region's longer-term growth and resilience than the Outlook chapter does for its near-term prospects. Is this contradictory, we're asked?
No, it's not, because, the short-term view is always affected by shocks, short-term events, And the pandemic is a very good example. We didn't see that coming, and it's hit and clobbered everyone. But we do see that, we get out of it eventually. And as I said before, China is a good example. How if we take the tough measure, you eventually get out of it, and you need to then, ramp up the economy again. The longer term is looking at the fundamentals, right? And trying to assess what is the growth potential of the economy, how well can it perform in the longer run, right? And so it's a different set of issues that are linked together. You need to survive the short run in order to get to the long run, but you certainly need policies for both the short run and the long run.
Absolutely fascinating to get your insight on all of this. Can we just get some final thoughts for you as we head towards the second and third quarters of this year?
Yes, of course. I think in the second and third quarter is going to be tough. Okay? And we still don't know how long and how severe this pandemic is going to be. But I think the expectation is that things are going to get worse before it gets better. How much worse and how long it take, I think is open to. It depends on how the kind of measures that the government takes and how strongly they stick with it. But we will emerge out of this, and I think we'll emerge stronger, because I think this crisis forced us to recognize that we are in this together, and we need to support one another, and we need to be prepared for the worst, and the next big one will be climate change, and we need to get ready for that, right?
Fascinating content, really compelling, very, very good to hear from you indeed. This was just an overview, however, though much more detail is available for you at the website AMRO-Asia.org. Now we'll have the full set of slides that Dr. Kaur provided for you in this presentation, but also the entire report that was generated. So I hope you found this interesting today. Do continue to engage with us and download that report and look at the detail. We hope to see you again this time next year. Bye-bye now.